All right, let's dive in. We can start by quickly introducing ourselves, who we are. I'm Ganesh. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Cortex. Before Cortex, I was at a company called LendUp. It was a fintech company. I spent a couple of years there, and I saw the monolith to microservice journey that a lot of organizations go through, and I'm sure a lot of you have gone through the similar things. I saw a lot of challenges that came with that, everything from understanding service ownership to what services we're actually building, who owns them, where do I find the run books, the on-call, the dashboards, all that stuff, but also got the chance to define our first set of service maturity standards, production readiness checklists, and saw the challenges that it took to get everyone to kind of care about practices, get everyone moving in the same direction, and how microservices and these complex ecosystems can have an effect on developer productivity. And that's kind of why we started Cortex, and really excited to chat about what we've learned about developer productivity, what we hear from our customers, and how to think about it as well. And I'll hand over to Anish.
Hey everyone, my name is Anish. I'm the other co-founder of Cortex. We've been building Cortex for about 3 years now, and it was largely based on our own experiences as engineers. I was an engineer at Uber, and Uber is like the classic case of microservices gone wrong. When you have so many services spread across so many different teams and no centralized place to organize them, you can imagine the effect that has on developer productivity in general. And I really saw how firsthand, even something like new engineer onboarding, it was very difficult because information about your services was spread across so many different tools and documentation as well. Really excited to share more about best practices around developer productivity and how to effectively not only track it, but really create that culture inside of your company.
So talking about the agenda for today, we're going to be starting by talking about what is developer productivity and why it's important in the first place. I'm sure obviously a lot of you have opinions and thoughts about this, otherwise you wouldn't be here at this webinar, but wanted to start off by setting that baseline before we dive in to measuring and then improving developer productivity. At the end, we'll spend about 5 or 10 minutes talking about Cortex with a quick product demo, and then open it up for questions as well. So what is developer productivity? Well, the one thing that we would definitely want to clarify is that developer productivity is not your old lines of code or number of diffs that I think a lot of organizations used to think about back in the day, but it's actually made up of multiple pillars, and this is not even a comprehensive list. But some of the pillars that we really think about are efficiency and speed. How much effort are teams spending on building software, and how fast and how frequently are teams shipping? These two things kind of go hand in hand, because the more efficient you are, the less effort it takes, the more you can ship, the more you can deliver. But at the same time, you want to counterbalance that by saying, are teams shipping high quality code? And that's a key input into productivity as well, because it's not enough to just be shipping and deploying things if what you're deploying is not actually high quality and meeting the business requirements of your organization. A third pillar we think about is satisfaction. Are developers happy with their software development lifecycle, or are they bogged down by things out of their control? The reason satisfaction is such a core part of developer productivity is because if your developers feel like they're bogged down by bureaucratic processes, lack of automation, everything takes very long, that can eventually add up and start slowing down your team because they feel helpless to actually go and execute on the things they're tasked to do. And so satisfaction is a key component of how you think about developer productivity. But why does this matter in the first place? A productive team develops faster, they ship with fewer bugs, they're happy and satisfied, and they ship often. And all this combined leads to higher morale, better retention, better delivery, better business outcomes, competitive advantages. The ROI of a productive and happy team is just extremely, extremely high, which is why I think a lot of organizations are obviously thinking about developer productivity as a core tenet, especially going into 2023. There's two things to keep in mind, as you think about measuring developer productivity. One, it's very easy to make mistakes and track the wrong things, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And it's important to break up the measurement into inputs and outputs. Inputs are things that you control around how people are doing things, and outputs are the indicators that tell you if the productivity is improving or not. And so we'll break this down into further detail, but I wanted to set up that context before we dive in. One of my favorite things, when it comes to developer productivity is Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And what does that exactly mean? Most metrics don't really don't have a direct impact on productivity, right? I think naturally, especially as organizations grow, We feel like we need numbers to help us understand what's happening in a day-to-day basis. And to get that feeling, to feel like we understand what's going on, we come up with metrics that we think are proxies, but they don't actually have a direct impact on productivity. So let's take lines of code, for example. The moment you start tracking lines of code and that becomes a target you're measuring productivity by, it immediately becomes a bad measure because it's very easy to game. If developers know that they're being assessed based on the number of lines of code, you start building white space or you start writing overcomplicated code for no reason. And now that target is, that measure is not a target and it doesn't actually tell you anything if you're improving productivity. And that's the reason why you shouldn't base performance or people decisions on metrics, right? You want to think about, how do I affect process? How do I create change? How do I create the cultural impact that's going to drive productivity that we want? Because the moment you start basing performance or people decisions based on those metrics, people will automatically start thinking about how to game it, how to beat the system, and then it's not going to tell you anything about your organization. And I think that's natural human behavior, right? Metrics can and will be gamed, and I think that's an expectation that you should have going in as you think about what metrics you want to track. The metrics you track should really be helping you make decisions about where are the areas of risk, what are the bottlenecks, how do you improve productivity and happiness across the board, instead of just giving you a number that says, hey, these teams are not doing great. And that's broken up into two parts, inputs and then output metrics. Inputs are developers doing the things that we believe is going to improve productivity. For example, unit testing, having accountable ownership, reliable, not flaky, fast builds, branch-based developments, PRs, all the things that we think will actually improve productivity. Those are your inputs. Those are the things you can control. Those are the things you can drive adoption across your organization. And that's where you should start thinking about measuring developer productivity. And then you have the outputs. So based on the inputs that are controlling, are you seeing the impact in the metrics that matter to your business? And so things like DORA metrics, PR cycle time, review time, velocity, these are all kind of the output metrics that you're thinking about. For most organizations, it's far more important to track the inputs and the outputs. When you think about a large organization or even an organization with more than 30 to 40 developers, you start having different processes across different teams. You have no idea about how those inputs are being controlled. You don't know if people are following the same set of best practices. And then when you start looking at output metrics, you don't understand why those output metrics are the way they are. And so it's extremely important to define that baseline first before you start thinking about the output metrics. And most organizations should be starting thinking about the inputs and then kind of tracking the outputs after that. So what are those output metrics and how do we think about that? They are metrics that are indicative of problems in your life cycle, but they're not just KPIs that you're trying to blindly improve, right? So like number of diffs or lines of code is a great example of that. Those don't tell you anything about the actual development lifecycle. They're just some sort of target metric that doesn't mean anything to your development organization. Some recommendations and things that we've seen work really well. DORA metrics are popular for a reason. For example, deploy frequency, one of the metrics in DORA, is a proxy to high confidence releases, right? It's a proxy to a lot of things, but as an example, if you have high deploy frequency, that means your developers have confidence in their releases that they're not going to break, which means they've probably implemented good testing strategies. You probably have strong CI/CD adoption across the board and a good build pipeline. You have the right infrastructure to deploy frequently. Development teams have autonomy to go and ship quickly, to build independently of other teams and deploy the changes for their services. And so for that reason, DORA metrics are great because they're proxies to other things that you care about and point out more deep-rooted issues in the organization. And it's a metric that encapsulates all of these in 4 core metrics that you can track. Another great output metric that we see for a lot of organizations is developer time to code. How long does it take a developer to ship their first meaningful change to production? This, again, is a great example because it, again, is a proxy for a lot of things. What does your environment look like? How long does it take to set up an environment? Is it easy to test? Do you have confidence in your testing? Do you have good review cycles where developers are not blocked on reviews? Is it easy for developers to get provision in your entire environment? And when you think about why developer time to code is so important, if you think about, a lot of organizations, the first meaningful PR can take a month. It can take multiple months for a developer to come in and actually start adding value from a business standpoint. And if you're able to bring that down even, from, let's say, from 3 months to 1 month, you're talking about more than $50,000 in savings immediately for every single developer that you onboard. So improving developer time to code is such a powerful way of driving productivity and efficiency across the organization. And again, it's a proxy to a lot of the other things that you care about that are more core to your engineering development lifecycle. If you do want to track lower level metrics that are not just proxies, make them things where improvements to those metrics actually drive outcomes that help your developers. And so that way developers will buy into the vision here. Great examples of this are PR review and cycle time, PR sizes. The reason for that, the reason I use those as examples is because the faster people are reviewing things, the smaller PRs are, it's easier to understand, it's easier to review, it's easier to ship things. And that removes a lot of the friction from the day-to-day operations for developers. And it's something that has a direct impact on productivity. And so those are examples of much more granular metrics that might be important that developers can actually buy in and say like, hey, this is something we want to improve in our team because it's going to have an impact on my day-to-day satisfaction. On the flip side, number of lines of code, like we talked about, is not a great low-level metric. It's not going to tell you anything about whether that code is actually meeting your business requirements. It's easy to game, it becomes a target. And at that point, you're not actually helping developers. You're just using an arbitrary metric to track what you think is productivity, which becomes gamed very, very quickly. Now that we've kind of talked about, measuring productivity and how you think about some of those pillars, we want to talk about the playbook for improving productivity. It starts with establishing a baseline. Where are we today? Using that to help you define what the relevant levers are. What can you control to improve that baseline? You want to create visibility, getting developers to care, creating that culture, driving that visibility across the organization. You track it, and then you repeat the cycle until you feel like you're continuously improving your developer productivity over time. Developer productivity is not something that you have a 6-month sprint and you say, we are productive now. It's an ongoing thing where the inputs are constantly changing, the outputs are constantly changing, and you need to keep an eye on what's most important to your business at that time. So let's start with the first one, establishing a baseline. It is completely futile to try and improve productivity without having a baseline of where you are today and understanding what you're looking to improve. And so start by answering, what are you improving? Are you trying to improve DORA metrics? Are you trying to improve developer time to code? What are the inputs here? What are the bottlenecks? Where are you seeing developer productivity slow down? And this in a lot of organizations should be fairly straightforward. And you can start tracking this in a more automated way. And most important, define your ideal end state. What do you hope will happen as you invest in developer productivity and improving developer productivity? What is the desired outcome? Are you looking for higher quality? Are you looking for more frequent ship times? Are you looking for developer satisfaction? It goes back to the advantages we talked about earlier around why does developer productivity matter? I think as an organization, you need to decide what is the ideal end state and what do you hope that organization looks like when it becomes extremely productive, because that can be different from organization to organization. For example, if you're a startup, you may care more about velocity and how fast you can ship versus something like your classic DORA metrics, right? Because if you're move fast and break things or whatever your philosophy is, you need to take that and work backwards to define what does developer productivity actually mean. Once you know what you're trying to improve and where those bottlenecks are, find the levers that you can use to change that. For example, if you're looking to improve lead time for changes, you probably want better testing. You want to drive CI/CD adoption. You're probably going to invest in tooling and automation that makes it easier to have better, more reliable builds, easier deployments, the single pane of glass where developers can go and ship and roll back in very standardized ways across your organization. If you're looking to change deploy frequency or even developer satisfaction, automation, tooling, developer experience, these are the kind of very tactical levers you can start changing and driving adoption for that are going to then impact those metrics that you care about. And so you want to find the right input metrics that will let you track these levers. For example, as you're thinking for lead time for changes, if you see that, based on qualitative or quantitative tracking that, developers are not shipping as frequently or it's taking a long time for something to get into production because the testing process is really slow because there's no automated unit testing, that's the first thing you want to start tracking. Understand your baseline of how many services today are doing automated unit testing in your CI pipelines. How many of them are reporting code coverage? What is your code coverage looking like today? Is that at a place you like? Are people doing integration tests? Those are very key input metrics that you can track and then drive adoption across organization. Once you know what those input metrics are, you can then track and report on the progress of adopting and changing these levers. Ideally, that tracking is fully automated, so you're not wasting time just doing the tracking itself, because then tracking becomes a thing you're doing versus actually improving your developer productivity metrics and those inputs. And finally, you want to continuously experiment with new levers, right? As you're experimenting with testing and driving adoption of testing, start thinking about what's next. What do you believe is going to drive that adoption? And I think what's really important is that as engineering leaders, as drivers of developer productivity, having that high conviction around what do you really believe is going to drive that improvement? It's not enough to just have an output metric and tell developers, hey, we want to improve DORA metrics. As engineering leaders, you need to decide what are the things that we really believe are going to take us to the next level of productivity, and make those initiatives and drive buy-in for those initiatives. And that's kind of how you drive the impact on these levers that you care about. The second to last thing here is creating visibility. This, in our mind, is probably the most important thing for improving productivity, because you need to change the culture to emphasize productivity, right? Your culture, it dictates how do developers think about their day-to-day work. And the more you can impact the culture, the more you can impact how people think about their daily workflows, the more likely it is for your developer productivity initiatives to actually stick and have the impact that you're looking for. So for example, frequent visibility on goals and progress is the best way to affect change. And what we mean by that is, let's say your input levers are things like driving better adoption of unit testing, telling all developers for the services that they own exactly where they're at on that adoption lifecycle. Are 50% of the services that I own doing unit testing? Is it 100%? Where are the gaps? And that should be communicated very frequently and very easily. I, as a developer, should be able to go in and very quickly see that. You also want to use more organization-wide forums for this kind of visibility as well. So if you're looking to affect something like unit testing, in every engineering all hands, talk about the progress you're making. Talk about the new changes, talk about the new tooling, talk about the impact that you're having as an organization based on the lever. So the more you're communicating this to the rest of the organization, the more the development organization starts internalizing, hey, this is something that we care about as a team. This is something that, it's not just, we said we care about testing. This is something we're trying to improve. It's something that's top of mind for leadership. It's something that we're looking at. It's something that we're tracking. And that starts to create that cultural shift in the organization, because you're driving frequent visibility. Think about it like ads, right? As companies are thinking about branding and advertising, TV ads are a great way of saying, if you keep presenting people with that same information over and over again, eventually you start thinking about that and you say like, hey, I'm developing, oh yeah, I should be doing unit testing. And so think about that visibility as a way of driving that cultural change. Emphasize that the changes you're looking to see are based on the input levers. Back to the earlier point, if you start overemphasizing the output metrics, it causes those to be gamed, right? You can't just go out and say like, oh, we want to improve DORA metrics. We want to improve DORA metrics. You got to really talk about, hey, we really care about deploy frequency because this is the business impact we hope to see. And as a result, these are the three things that we're trying to adopt. We're trying to adopt our new CI platform. We're trying to adopt our new deploy tooling, and we're trying to adopt our developer portal that's going to help us drive adoption of these new pipelines. And so give developers visibility into the input levers they should be thinking about. And on the flip side, make sure that you give management the visibility in how their orgs are progressing, right? It's not enough to just give the developers visibility, but managers should know, hey, how is my team tracking against the goals that we have as an organization? And that can be aggregated at the service level, the library level, the team level. Giving management that visibility will help them make more informed decisions about what they should be prioritizing in their team. For example, if you have a goal to drive high adoption of unit testing in the next 6 months, as an engineering manager, I should be able to come in and say, hey, we are at 70% coverage today across all of our services from a unit testing standpoint. The last 30% is something we're going to be prioritizing over the next 6 months, and here's how we're going to do it. But if this visibility is only at the executive level or only at the developer level, then managers are kind of running blind, and you're never going to get that engagement and buy-in you need from across the organization. And so it's extremely important to drive that visibility at the management level as well. And by doing all of these, by defining your baseline, finding those levers, and then creating the visibility across the organization, you're now creating this cultural shift where developers are thinking about it. It's not just something that leadership is thinking about, but developers are thinking about this in their day-to-day. And this is where the whole shift left mindset really comes in, is how do you move these things earlier in the life cycle? And earlier in the life cycle doesn't necessarily mean just when you're writing code, but even before you're writing code, before you start writing something, these requirements and these levers are top of mind for developers, and they're thinking about this as they go into every single project. And so these are the ways we really think about, how do you improve developer productivity? It's not just tracking metrics and giving people dashboards, but creating that cultural change and telling developers exactly what they should be focusing on to get to the promised land.
Awesome. And so kind of tying it all together with, well, how does Cortex actually help you improve these things? So Cortex in general is a developer portal. It actually helps you track your services and your infrastructure, and then also makes it easy for your engineering organization to actually get visibility into who owns these services, where does all documentation for them live, but more importantly, how do you actually create that culture of service reliability and ownership? Majority of our customers actually use Cortex to track developer productivity, and they break it down into the two categories that Ganesh was just talking about. The input metrics that actually help you test, are people building things the right way? And then those output metrics, which translate sometimes into things like DORA, which really give you this cohesive understanding. Are developers in our company actually happy, and are they actually productive over time? And so we wanted to give a quick demo and show actually how you can use Cortex to track some of this data. And so we'll switch over to the demo right now. Awesome. And so I'm sure many of you have seen a spreadsheet like this. Oftentimes when you're tracking metrics around your services, oftentimes even those input metrics, for example, do my services have runbooks? Do they have an on-call rotation attached to them? Oftentimes these are tracked in these crazy spreadsheets where you have 50 rows of your services and then 15 columns. And every column is a different tool that you're tracking data from, or you're even asking engineers to fill out this spreadsheet on their own. Obviously, a spreadsheet like this can go out of date very quickly, but I think there are even deeper ramifications when you're trying to track developer productivity using a spreadsheet. For example, it's very hard to understand trends in the data, or even be able to show leadership, hey, this is the ROI that we're seeing from tracking these metrics. And then the deepest problem really is, how do you actually encourage engineers to care about these metrics in the first place? How do you show engineers that the impact of these metrics is actually having direct business impact over time? And so this is something that we really tried to solve with Cortex. And to do that, we actually built this product called Scorecards. And so Scorecards at a high level, they basically let you track metrics for a group of services. And the goal is, how do we incentivize behavior in the right direction? And so if we go back to our paradigm of input versus output metrics, scorecards are actually a perfect way to represent this data. And it's a lot more than just creating a dashboard. For example, if I click into the scorecard here, this maturity index scorecard, you'll see all of the services are actually mapped to a different level. And these levels are built of different rules that I've created that are tracking various input metrics that my organization cares about. And the really cool part about this is that we've segmented it into 3 different types of levels. You have bronze, silver, and gold. You can customize any number of levels you want. But the really awesome part about this is that it almost creates this natural gamification of service quality. And Cortex handles messaging to all service owners. We'll message them, letting them know where their service is in between these levels, and will actually help create that culture of ownership and service reliability that will then impact those output metrics like DORA that you care about. For example, when you look at these different rules you define, it's things like make sure that you have no critical vulnerabilities. In this bronze level, you're ensuring that you have a README or at least 2 owners. All of these things will have a direct impact at the end of the day, even on things like deploy frequency or MTTR. I think this rule has some output metrics too, but for the most part, you can actually customize the rules across 40 different integrations that we have. And for every integration, we actually expose multiple of their APIs that let you pull data in a scorecard and then grade it. And
one of the great things about the scorecards as well is, like, it can help you define that baseline understanding of, hey, given the input levers, where are we today and where we should be focusing time on? For example, if you're trying to drive that unit test coverage across the organization, you can create a scorecard to say how many services today are actually doing unit testing, how many services are doing integration testing, how many services don't have any Dockerization for local development. And then you say, like, hey, most of our services are Dockerized, but only 40% of our services are doing automated unit testing. That gives you clear visibility into, hey, we need to be prioritizing this first. And so you can use it to track the baseline, but then also drive the change that you're looking for.
Exactly. And the really cool thing about scorecards is that we have really powerful reporting that's just built into the product. My favorite is this bird's eye report that gives you almost this heat map view of your organization. For example, I can break this into teams. I can even import the organizational context inside of Cortex. And now you can actually show leadership exactly what they should be focused on in areas of risk in the business. For example, it looks like in this one, your automated unit testing looks like the backend team isn't doing great here. And this is actually a great way to actually go in and then analyze what are the services that are causing this rule to have such a low score. And you can make more informed decisions about where are areas of across your business where developer productivity, those input metrics are not being tracked in the right way. Kind of going back now to scorecards, I think the awesome part is due to the flexibility of the rule set, from those input metrics, I can now actually start tracking these output metrics in the form of DORA. And so Cortex actually has a built-in DORA metrics template scorecard. So in just one click, you can apply this to all of the services in your organization. But you can see here, we're starting to track things like deploy time and frequency, the number of rollbacks. We can even track information directly from PagerDuty, like your NTTR or incidents were acknowledged within any time interval that you determine. The nice thing is you can customize this to fit the needs of your organization. And from there, the same reporting and all of those graphs that we're generating, you can use that to determine, is progress being made over time in the right direction? Are we actually seeing impact made to the different types of services that we have in the company? And it's a lot of different ways to analyze the data to understand, okay, are we actually seeing the progress being made? And again, the really nice thing about Cortex is that it's not just the reporting that you get from it. Will actually go in and message your engineers and help them understand, for the services that I own, are things actually improving or moving in the right direction?
So this goes back to the kind of the visibility that we we're talking about earlier. Imagine you're a developer. I can come into Cortex and very easily understand, what is my organization trying to track? And for the services that I own, where am I in that initiative? What are the things I should be focusing on? And through the notifications, the insights, the visibility that we're driving, it's top of mind for developers. And it's an automated way of doing that versus having to create a bunch of Jira tickets and go out and communicate this every single day. Cortex can do that for you and drive that visibility in a much more automated fashion.
And let's say, this quarter, we have a really important initiative. We want everyone to ensure that they have at least a README in their service, that their SonarQube code coverage is reporting and meets expectations. Maybe this is an org-wide initiative that we want to get done by the end of this quarter. So to help with that, we actually built this product called initiatives, where in a given scorecard, I can prioritize a level or a rule and set a deadline. And Cortex will actually assign action items to engineers based on the services that they own. And then we'll actually even automatically create Jira tickets and close them out and help you understand which services are passing, which ones are failing, and apply that to your teams as well. And so Cortex will not only help you track those metrics that you care about, but then actually encourage and drive the progress that you want to see across your engineering team, which can be very powerful when you combine those two things together. The core of the product comes from the catalog. And one of the cool things we've seen actually impact developer productivity and new engineer onboarding is our developer homepage product. And so when engineers log into Cortex, they actually can see all of the services and resources they own, but we'll also show you any open PRs, assigned reviews. We'll even show engineers quick reviews that they have. For example, maybe two people have already reviewed it out of 3, and you can just quickly review this. We'll show these engineers this information with the goal of making them more productive and making the overall quality of your engineering team increase. For example, you can even see open Jira tickets that are assigned to you, and then any action items from Cortex which involve your initiatives or failing scorecard rules. Cortex will even show you recommendations based on the scorecards you have on quick wins that you can see. So for example, you have 2 rules left from reaching gold on your DORA metrics scorecard. You'll even see like when you're on call next. We found that we're actually saving engineers an average of 30 minutes a week just by aggregating all of the information that they care about into one place. And for new engineers especially, you can imagine there's so many different tools that exist inside of your company. Cortex helps organize it all into one place and really helps them prioritize what they actually care about. One of the other really powerful parts of our product that we've seen impact developer productivity is our Scaffolder feature. I'm sure in a lot of your companies, the process of actually creating services can be a very manual process that involves 7 or 8 different steps, and maybe it involves like command line. What we oftentimes see in the enterprise is that because there's no centralized way to create services, one team is running this version of Kubernetes, another team is running another one. It becomes very complicated to actually track and understand migrations because people have started building services in so many different ways. Our Scaffolder product actually lets you templatize the creation of services, and you can then, as an engineer, you can come in, you can select a template. I can fill out the form and configure the repository, and essentially Cortex will create the Git repository, fill in the boilerplate code, add the service back to the catalog with accurate ownership. We can even hit internal webhooks or custom APIs that you want to configure your own internal processes. But it's really end-to-end creating a service and ensuring that your best practices are being met from day one. This has had tremendous impact on developer productivity in general because the process of creating a service is simplified, and the added benefit is that you can ensure that people are actually following the best practices that you care about from day one, which is really, really cool. And you can even add to existing services too. So if you want to configure infrastructure, like Terraform, for example, or serverless CI, you can do that as well. Finally, one of the other really cool features, and this is our service catalog product, it's like that single pane of glass to understand everything about your service. So you can see everything from ownership to who's currently on call, to the scorecards the service is a part of, any information about the service like dependencies, for example, super useful in on-call analysis and incident triage. One of the most interesting features we just launched is actions. Ganesh, you want to talk a little about actions?
Yeah, so you think about those levers we're talking about, how do you drive productivity and efficiency across your organization? One of the most powerful ways of doing that is enabling self-serve and simplifying the time it takes to take those individual actions. So imagine like deploying a service. Deploying a service in many cases can be a high friction process that involves your Jenkins pipelines. Maybe it requires other processes to actually get your service into production. One of the most powerful things about Cortex is the ability to build these self-serve actions that trigger and hit internal APIs. So a developer can come into Cortex, hit a button to deploy their service. You configure the self-serve action, it'll trigger your Jenkins pipeline and trigger that build automatically. And so being able to pull these things into Cortex can really improve the developer productivity and efficiency and standardize how things are done across the organization, which then also helps that developer time to code because every single service is operated in the exact same way. This can be used for things like provisioning AWS resources. You can even build actions for new engineer onboarding. So when a new developer comes, they can come into Cortex, trigger an action that provisions their accounts on different tools, provisions the right access levels, provisions their environment. So really thinking about how do I improve developer productivity on a day-to-day operational basis, but also for that developer time to code and new engineer onboarding as well. And so that's Cortex in a nutshell. Obviously, the service catalog can help with a lot of that visibility and driving operational excellence. The scorecards are a great way of tracking input metrics as well as output metrics across the board, whether that's things like test coverage, adoption of on-call, SLOs, DORA metrics, all across the board. It's a very configurable way of driving those input metrics. And most importantly, driving visibility for developers as well as leaders. As we talked about, creating that cultural change is one of the most important ways of driving developer productivity. How do you get developers and leaders to think about these metrics all the time as they're building new software? Through the gamification, through the scorecards, through the notifications, through the developer homepage, we're able to create that visibility for you on a day-to-day basis. So those initiatives are always top of mind for developers as well as leaders. And that's the webinar for today. I hope you all learned about developer productivity. I think what we're really excited for this session was really compiling everything that we've learned talking to our customers about how they think about developer productivity and efficiency and how to improve it. And I hope you enjoyed the demo of Cortex as well. If you have any questions, we'll be around for the next 15, 20 minutes. Feel free to drop those questions in the chat and we'll kind of go through and answer them as they come in. Really appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much for attending. Appreciate your support and keep an eye out for the next webinar as well.
Thank you so much.
Question coming in about how we think about developer time to code. One of the things that I think really helps for developer time to code is the ownership piece in Cortex. So when the new engineer joins the organization, they get automatically added to your IDP. So whether they get added to Workday or Okta or Groups or GitHub Teams, that information automatically syncs into Cortex through the integrations that we have. And so if I'm added to, let's say, the backend infrastructure team, that information syncs into Cortex automatically. And when I log into Cortex for the first time, it actually hydrates the rest of the product automatically. So I log in, I see the services that I own, I see the initiatives that are ongoing for my specific team. I get access to our team page. And so the team page has information about the team, who's on the team, what services we own, their charter, what they're focused on. It gives me visibility into the kind of the action items and the ongoing deadlines for that team. And so when you think about developer time to code, building that context extremely fast in their first week is a great way of helping improve that ramp time. And they understand like what's important, what their context is, who they should be talking to. And because that process is fully automated with integration with your IDP, we're able to drive that without any additional overhead from yourself. So that's one of the ways we really think about developer time to code, as well as a Scaffolder product that Nish was showing earlier. It's a great way of giving developers the confidence that if they're working on a new service, if they're working on new projects, they are not worried about, hey, am I following our best practices? Am I doing things the right way? Because that template guarantees that you're following those best practices, you're able to improve that ramp time much more, especially when it comes to new projects and new systems that teams are working on. How easy is it to import services into Cortex if it's not integrated, particularly into the scorecards and the other inputs and outputs? Adding new services is automatic in Cortex. So we can automatically discover from your Git repositories, from your APM, from Kubernetes, and we can ingest that into Cortex. We also have a GitOps model where you can define information about your service, put that into your Git repository, and we'll ingest that information. What's really cool is that the moment a service is ingested into Cortex, it automatically gets the scorecards applied to it based on the filters. And so you'll immediately see the score for a new service around, whether it's following those inputs and output metrics. That kind of ties back to the scaffolder, where ideally any new service that's created using the scaffolder, it's a great way of making sure that those best practices are followed. And the scorecards themselves are extremely easy. You can just go in and select the integration, select the rules that you want to enforce, and we'll make the request to your third-party tools, ingest that data, and give you those scores as well. Question around how do you drive an ownership culture? Outside of just tracking it, is there enough momentum to make it matter where metrics are concerned? I think there's a couple pieces to creating an ownership culture. I think it starts by creating that baseline and making it clear that accountable ownership is going to be a key focus area, and talking about the ROI, like why ownership is so important. For example, think about something like Log4j, right? Log4j hits, and a lot of organizations spend the first few months understanding what services do we even have that are affected, and then you spend another month tracking down who's going to go in and fix that. And so when an incident like that hits, ownership is extremely important because you have somebody that's accountable, or a team that's accountable for the outcomes of that service. So that's a way to drive that ROI for leadership and say like, hey, leadership, this is why it's important for us to invest in ownership as an organization. I think the other thing is like a you build it, you own it culture as well. So, having developers have some level of on-call visibility, making sure that they know when issues are being flagged for their services. It's something that comes to the development team that built that service in the first place. So creating that like you build it, you own it culture is extremely important as well. I think the other thing is driving the value. Like the reason I think scorecards really work for developers and why that ownership piece is so important is because a lot of these things are processes that developers are already doing. Like you think about a production readiness checklist, right? That's something that developers have to do in order to get into production. And with that scorecard, you can automate that away, and that helps you drive the ownership and say, hey, by having this ownership, we're reducing a lot of the manual overhead that you need to follow these processes, whether it's security checks, whether that's production readiness, whether that's service maturity, and creating that visibility also drives ownership across the board. And so I think finding those places where accountability is important, either during incidents with on-call, is a great way of driving that ownership culture. And I think it also goes back to visibility. I think making sure that ownership is a key focus area from the leadership all the way down, I think is extremely important. And consistently explaining and creating the visibility as to why ownership matters, what the ROI is, before something happens that, you're like, oh, I wish we had ownership today, and this is a thing that we could have solved it. I think those are some of the ways that we think about driving that ownership culture across the board. One question here, a little bit of skepticism about the gamification, whether we've seen the gamification really have an impact on, kind of the cultural aspect of things from scorecards. It's been really awesome to see kind of how impactful the gamification and scorecards can be to getting people to care about services. I think what's really cool is I always like to say, developers are craftspeople. Like we care about building high quality code. We care about following those standards and improving and building great things. But I think the challenge is that in a lot of organizations, it's not clear what good means. Like, what does it mean to have a high quality software or a service that's meeting those standards internally? Like, what are those standards in the first place? And so by codifying that in a place where as a developer can go in and say, hey, I know exactly where my service is, and you create that bronze, silver, gold, the prioritization framework that comes out of the box with that, I think that creates this culture of like, hey, my service is not where I know it can be, and how can I be improving that? And so I think just that visibility and giving developers like, hey, where is your service? Where is that compared to all the other services in the organization? Especially knowing that we care about, delivering high quality software. We care about working in an environment where productivity is important. Like we talked about earlier, highly productive teams are happier because they have less friction. They're able to move faster. They're able to build things. And so if you take a perspective of the fact that developers care about that's productivity, we start to see that the gamification really works, because for the first time, developers have visibility on exactly the things they should be focused on to improve productivity for themselves, with the implicit guarantee that these are things that the organization cares about. So when you see it in a scorecard, it's obvious like, hey, the organization cares about this. It's okay for me to work on this as well. Really great question coming in. There's a lot of different use cases, scorecards, ownership, integration. In actual development, how do you choose which has the most impact? Especially, this is like a 0 to 1 product where engineers might not know what will impact them the most before you go in and build this. That's a really great question. And this is something, as we've worked with a lot of organizations, we've built some pretty strong opinions around how to start and what adoption should look like. So when you think about what you start with, I think ownership is the most important thing. So what we tell our customers is, we consider a user onboarded when they've ingested all their services into Cortex, and every service has ownership defined. Because it doesn't matter if you start tracking these metrics and scorecards, because if you have no way to say like, hey, this service is not even at the bronze level, it's even before that, who's going to go in and actually fix that? Who should be caring about it? It doesn't really matter if you don't have accountability and ownership to when you're tracking those metrics. And there's so much that having that ownership unlocks. And so what we say is like, even if it takes you 2 weeks or a month to create that ownership, focus on that first. Make sure that ownership is defined. And what we see a lot of organizations is Cortex's forcing function to have those conversations internally, because in most cases, ownership is not clearly defined. And this is the first time you're having a crisp conversation about, hey, who actually owns this thing? Like, we don't even know this thing existed, who owns it? And it forces you to have those conversations. And so I would say you start there. Once you start there, then you can start defining those initial scorecards around data quality and hygiene. So in order to track things like code coverage or unit testing or on-call metrics or even those outcome metrics, you need to know what are all of our on-call rotations, what are all of our services and the SonarQube projects and the Git repositories. So creating a scorecard that has like basic data quality and governance. Hey, for every single service, we need to know who the owner is. We need to know where your Git repository is, where your SonarQube project is. And a lot of this is automated in Cortex. You don't have to actually do the work to do that. But defining that baseline is extremely important. From there, you use a scorecard as kind of a way to do that baselining. So you create a scorecard that's aspirational, right? So it's like, if the world was perfect, what are all the things our developers would be doing, whether that's the unit testing or quality or on-call adoption, like you own it, you build it. Create a scorecard that has all of that information in there once. And then you can use the reporting to understand where are we seeing the most friction? Like, what are the things that most of our developers are not doing well? And that'll give you guidance around, hey, are there things we should be investing outside of scorecards and outside of the reporting? Should we be investing in tooling or other things to make it easier? Like, why are these metrics lagging behind? And so using a scorecard to drive that baseline is extremely important, because it gives you as a team visibility into what you should be investing in as you're going down this initiative. Once you have that visibility, then you can create that initial like input metric scorecard around driving very key things. So that whether it's like, again, like the unit testing or the CI/CD or the deployments, creating a scorecard with that tiering like bronze, silver, and gold is extremely important, because it gives a prioritization framework. So what are the things of all the 15 things that a great service is doing? What are the things that I should be focusing on as a developer first and foremost? And that prioritization is extremely useful. And generally what we recommend is that those initial levels are easy. You want developers to have quick wins so that they see that their service is improving, they're feeling the impact of improving that. And so finding those really quick wins is a great way of buying adoption and engagement in this initiative as well. So the bronze and silver level should be made up of a lot of quick wins. And over time, you're going to get more and more complicated. It requires more additional effort. But yeah, finding those quick wins is extremely important. So yeah, to summarize, I would say defining services and ownership is first and foremost creating a baseline of where the areas of risk. In parallel, investing in tooling and automation to improve some of those things that you don't have a story for yet, and then creating a highly prioritized list of things that the scorecard tracks to create those quick wins and create the momentum on this initiative. And so those are the kind of things we think about. So around like, what do you know, what developers don't know, what will impact them? Finding things that are key focus areas and are going to be very impactful and very easy to do are great things to start with. I hope that answers the question. Definitely let me know if there's any clarification I can add there. Cool. I think those are all the questions. If you have any follow-up questions for us, please feel free to reach out via email. We're happy to talk. Obviously, we're very passionate about this. It's something that's top of mind. What's great is, we have the opportunity to work with a lot of customers across industry, different sizes, whether it's, companies with 50 engineers, 20 engineers, all the way to thousands and thousands of engineers. We've kind of seen what's worked, what's not worked when you think about developer productivity and efficiency. Especially over the last couple of years, as this has become top of mind for a lot of people. It's something we care about a lot, especially, having been developers ourselves. I think we know the cost of developer productivity tracking that doesn't actually have impact. Like as a developer, I want to know that these things actually matter to me and they're helping me be a happier developer, helping me build things that are cool and fun and things that I care about or adding value to the business. And so I think as former developers, this is something that is really it's really close to home and something we care about. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out directly to us. Our emails are on the slide here. We'll follow up with an email as well as after this webinar. Again, I'm Ganesh, and this is my co-founder Anish. Feel free to shoot us an email, first name at Cortex.io. Really excited. Thank you all so much for attending the webinar. Hope you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, definitely let us know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for
Really
attending.
appreciate your time.
Hope to see you at the next one.